And we're back. Okay, I will say, let's go. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph 73a, Friday's daf in Mirza Hashem. Let us begin. I will say, I'm not going to do the sponsorships again, right? Okay, good. We're good with the sponsorships. Same sponsors in Mirza Hashem for Thursday and Friday. Shkoyach to everyone who's sponsored. All right. Chevron Zoom, you still good? All right, excellent. All right. Let's say we are now, Baruch Hashem, beginning Friday's daf. It's already Erev Shabbos, so it's totally permitted to start Friday's daf as well. Mirza Hashem, I don't think in the history of daf Yomi at the Shah, I don't think we've ever done this before. But all right, Baruch Hashem, 2 blot in one night, incredible. All right, I will say, let's go. So we're starting on today's daf, Friday's daf, Erev Shabbos. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph 73a, and we are picking up 6 lines down from the top. Rabba v'Rava, lo svir luhu had Rav Huna. Ultimately, again, Rabba and Rav Huna, they did not subscribe to the view of Rav Huna. Now remember again, Rav Huna said, Gito ki matanaso, that a get is just like a matana. Just like a matana. And again, Rav Huna gave multiple explanations or multiple examples of how a get and a matana are the same. So Rabba and Rava did not agree with the statement of Rav Huna. Why? Rabbi say they were concerned that one will come to think that maybe there is a get after death. And Rabbi say, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi, last wide line in Rashi. On the top. Rashi says, remember, so what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna said that get is just like matana. A shchiv mirah gives a matana, right? It gives a matana. Okay? Yeah? Okay, sorry. I was so proud of myself, I thought I got it all. Okay, so I'll say, so listen to this. So remember again, we said gets just like a matana. Now what does it mean gets like a matana? What does it mean gets like a matana? So remember again, Shchiv Mirah goes ahead and gives a gift. And then he recovers. What's the halacha? The gift is void. So Rav Huna wanted to say that ultimately again, that halacha l'maisa, get is the same thing. Reuven gives Rachel a get. This is your get if I die from this illness. And ultimately, again, he recovers. Baruch Hashem, the get is going to be void. So Rav and Rav Huna were concerned about that case. That people may come to think that there is a get achar misa. What does that mean? Look at Rashi now. Rashi says, Di'im amad chozer, because we'll say, since if he recovers, ultimately, again, the get is void. Havi get ademayis. People might think that the only time a get is valid is after death. We'll say people will just simply get confused. What they're not going to realize is they're going to look at this case and then say, okay, husband recovered, and therefore the get is valid. Which must mean that in these kind of cases, the only time the get is valid is when the husband dies. And people could come to confuse that and think that Allah Chalamaisa, there's such a thing as a posthumous get. Incredible. So everyone says, I don't understand. So just understand what just happened over here. Let me just illustrate the case quickly. Remember again, what's happening? Reuven gives Rachel a get. He says, this is your get, right? Imasi. This is your get from today if I die. So Rav Huna, so now what happens? Baruch Hashem, Reuven has a refuah shalema. So Rabbi say, what does Rav Huna say? Rav Huna says, the get's void. There's no get. They're married. Rabba and Rava say, no, the get is valid. The get is valid, because if we don't say the get is valid, we're afraid that people are going to get mixed up. And Rava says, whoa. So Rabba and Rava, what you're saying is, a get that is really invalid, you're making valid. So you're saying now Rachel's divorced. Rachel's going to go ahead and get remarried. So you are allowing a woman who is really married mid'oraisa to be divorced, to get remarried. How can you do that? So the Gemara says, Mishum Gzeira, because they're concerned that people are going to get confused. Sharinan Eishes Ish La'alma, you're going to allow a married woman to get remarried. It doesn't make any sense. The Gemara says, yeah, actually we can do that. I'll tell you why. Called the Mekadesh Adaita Dirabana Mekadesh. We'll say there's a concept, Kiddushin. The concept of Kiddushin is predicated on the consent of Chazal, of the rabbis. Remember again, when a man gets married, what does he say to his wife? Hariat Nikudesh Asli Batabazu Kiddas Moshe the Yisrael. Rabbi say, we get married with the understanding that our marriages are really built on the consent of Moshe and Yisrael, of Chazal. And therefore, again, if Chazal do not like a particular marriage, they have the ability to go ahead and dissolve it. Afkinu, I would call afkaz kiddushin, dissolution of the marriage. And also what the Gemara is suggesting over here is there are certain cases where we are so concerned about confusion that may arise. Chazal aren't actually saying the get is good. What they're saying is like this. They're actually retroactively dissolving the marriage so that the need for a get is totally obviated. A dramatic case. So the Gemara says, well, say the idea that the rabbis could go ahead and dissolve a marriage works well when you're talking about marriage that is affected with money. Because you could repurpose it. You could say, what was the money? What was the money? The money ultimately, again, was a matana. However, Kaddish bebiya ma'ikal meimar. They both say Kiddushin marriage could be effective with biyah. So look, you could repurpose money and say it wasn't kesef Kiddushin, but rather, again, it was just a gift. How exactly are you repurposing biyah? Right? It wasn't biyah, it was what, like a shalom aleichem? Like what was it? What was it exactly? In other words, how do you reclassify that? To which the Gemara says, Amrlei, Shavyor Rabbanan lebi'ilasa bilas znos. So there is a way to reclassify it. Ultimately, again, Chazal recategorized it from a biyah of Kiddushin, ultimately, again, to a biyah of znos. Incredible. So again, a dramatic idea over here. So Rabba and Rava, again, so what we have over here in this case is, again, Reuven gives Rachel the get with a t'nai, right? This is your get if mehayom, from now, if I die. Ultimately, again, Reuven recovers. Rav Huna says, fine, the get is void. Rabba and Rava say, no, the get is still valid. Because if we say the get is void, people are going to think the get's only going to be chal only if he dies. And people are going to therefore begin to think that there's such a thing as a pashtumas get, which would be a disaster. So therefore the get is valid according to Rabbi Rav Huna, even though halacha l'maisa, Baruch Hashem, he totally recovered. But how can you do that? If the get is void, mid'oraisa, how can you say mid'rabbanan that the get is good? Because of us, the simple answer is Chazal control marriage. The institution of marriage ultimately, again, is controlled by the rabbis. And therefore, again, in dramatic circumstances, when the rabbis feel the need for some type of communal good, they have the ability to dissolve marriage. Incredible. Tan Rabbanan. Let's analyze. So listen to this. This is your get from today if I die from this illness. Now let's listen to this case. The nafal habayis alav. And the house fell down on him. Right? His wife has an alibi. She has an alibi, right? So fascinating. So what happened? He gives her the get. This is your get if I die from this illness, and the house collapses on him. So we'll say, so now, what's the shiloh over here? He died. But what? It wasn't from the illness. So, kishu nachash, or he gives her the get. This is your get if I die from this illness, and he's bit by a snake, right? Ain't no get. So we'll say it's not a get. It's not a get. Why is it not a get? Why would it be a get? In other words, he made it very specific Tanai. The Tanai was not satisfied. It's true, he's dead, but Lamais, again, not from the reasons that he built into the get. So it's not a get. However, Rabbi, listen to this. We'll say, now, if he says like this, if Reuven's in bed sick, he says, this is your get if I do not, from today, if I do not get up from this illness. And while he's in bed, right, the house falls on him. Or while he's in bed, kishu nachash, the snake bit him, harez a get. The get is a valid get. I asked the Gemara, I don't understand. What's the difference between the two cases? So Rabbi said, I watch this. Shalchu mitam, achlu ari ein lanu. So Rabbi say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, literally, achlu ari, a case of being consumed by a lion, is not a common case. They will say, what does that answer mean? Take a look at Rashi. Shalchu mitam. You see that Rashi? It's right across from Tosas Eisvei. Shalchu mitam al yedei ma'aseh she'ira be'echad she'amar im lo emon michol izeh. Well, so listen to this. So the Rashi said, we're doing a different case. A guy goes ahead and says to his wife, "This is your get," or he made up. It doesn't have to be a get case. He made some type of condition, right? Let's just go with get. This is your get. This is your get if I do not recover from this illness. And what happened? He was eaten by a lion. So they sent the Shaila to Eretz Yisrael. Shivu, and from Eretz Yisrael they responded, Ein lanu sheyehei get the onsa de lo shchiach hamocha. The onsa de lo shchiach lo aseka daite. They say, this is so good. Listen to this, what saying. There's a concept in halacha called onsa, ones de lo shchiach. What's an ones de lo shchiach? Is an unexpected circumstance. No, there's a better phrase for it. unexpected extenuating circumstances. An ones, Shabbosai, means an extenuating circumstance. But you could have an ones deshchicha, right? A common type of ones, a common type of extenuating circumstance. And then there's what's called ones de lo shchiach, right? An ones is an extenuating circumstance that people just do not plan for, that people just don't have in mind. So we'll say, what's a good example of that? Being eaten by a lion. Being eaten by a lion. So I will say, so in other words, halacha, when a person makes a t'nai, they understand that at the end of the day, their t'nai may still be subject to even extenuating circumstances, and they have that in mind. But when something is so out of left field, it doesn't qualify, it doesn't really show up in halacha. Let me illustrate this in the opposite way. Remember, we had the case of a guy who says to his wife, "This is your get if I don't come back in 30 days." But remember this case, and he comes back, and what happened? Paskamav, right? The bridge broke. The bridge broke, and he's standing by the other side of the river, and he's screaming out, "Chazda asai, Chazda, I'm here." And the Gemara says, "Lo sheimas, you're not here. You're not here." But it's an ones. It's an ones. To which the Gemara says, Ruvain, you should have planned for that. Because again, bridges break. But I will say the concept ultimately, again, of being eaten by a lion, this is what's called an oros l'shchach. And I will say, so let's take this back. Essentially what the Gemara is doing is there are two cases in the Brisa, right? Case number one is Reuven gives a get to Rachel and he says, "This is your get from today. If I die from this illness and the house falls on him, or the snake bites him." So I will say, what did the first case in the Brisa say? It's not a get. Right? I'm sorry. Harez a get. Sorry. The get is no. Ain't no get. Sorry. It's not a get. Now I will say. Now why is it not a get? So I will say. So okay. Actually, before we get to that, second case in the Brisa was if this is your get, if I don't get up from this illness, and same case, the house falls down and the snake bites him. What did the end of the Brisa say? Harez a get. So the Gemara says, I understand. It's the same case. Same case. So why in the first case are you telling me ultimately again that it's not a get, and in the second case you're telling me it is a get? The Gemara says you're right. The second case is wrong. The first case is right. The first case is correct. The second case is wrong. So meaning I will say, Reuven gives a get to his wife, and he says to her, "This is your get if I die from this illness." And then what happens? Halacha l'maisa, the house falls down on him, or the snake bites him. Ultimately, again, the get is not a valid get. Why, Rabbi say? This is an ones de lo shchiach, an unexpected, extenuating circumstance, and therefore halacha l'maisa, the get is simply not valid. She's a widow, but ultimately, again, the get will not be valid. Onsai de lo shchiach. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So I'll say some stories about this, or some examples. Hahu gavra, the zabin ar lechari. We'll say these are great cases. There was a guy who ultimately, again, sold property to his friend, right? So Reuven sold the field to Shimon. Kabal alei kol onsa. Now we'll say, Reuven sold it with a guarantee. So literally, what does that mean? He was makabel upon himself anything that would come up with the land, right? He essentially was giving him like title insurance, right? Anything that happens, right? Property insurance, anything that happens with the land, ultimately, again, I'll be responsible. We'll say, what happened? L'sof afiku banara. So we'll say, it turned out the king ordered a redirecting of the river, and now the river went right through Shimon's field. Shimon goes back to Reuben. So I'm sorry. So Afiku Bainara. So we'll say, so Shimon goes back to Reuben and says, "Okay, you owe me money. Pay me for the field." Ravina said to Reuven, "Yeah, Shimon's right. Reuven, paying for the field." So the Gemara says, after all, Reuven, you took upon yourself any extenuating circumstance which would come up. No. So we'll say, so Ravina felt, I'm sorry, Rav Acha bar Tachlifa said to Ravina, no. What did Reuven take upon himself? What did Reuven take upon himself? What did he take upon himself? Foreseeable circumstances. I will say, in general, whenever you take achrayus for something, you only take achrayus ultimately, again, for something foreseeable. You can't take achrayus for unforeseen circumstances. I will say, by the way, like even in the world of insurance, they have this concept like this, right? You could have insurance, but if there's an act of God, right? Is that what they call it, I think, right? Like an act of God. So like, in other words, even insurance will say, but I have insurance, yeah. Insurance covers you for normative realities. It's not going to cover you ultimately, again, for things that are totally unexpected. So the Gemara says, so this matter escalated. It was Rava for Rava Amalahu, Onsid lo shiachu. And ultimately, again, Rava Paskin, Ruvain, you don't owe Shimon any money. Even though when you sold the field with a guarantee. The guarantee only covers normative cases, and this is not a normative case. So Onsid lo shiach, and therefore you're not chayiv for it. We'll say, Esvei Ravina l'Rava. So Ravina raised the kasha to Rava. Imlo amod mechol lizev enough alav bayis or kishu nachash. Ruvain gives a get to Rachel, and he says to her, if I don't get up from this illness, and then what happens? This is your get, and then the house falls on him, the snake bites him. Harei is a get. The get is a valid get. What about the beginning of the brisa that said ain't no get? It's not a get. So we'll say, remember again, he's quoting the second case of the brisa, not the first case of the brisa. Because contradiction between the Reisha and the Seifa, you can't ask a question from it. Yeah, that's correct. Kevin the kasha the Reisha Seifa lo itmar be midrasha umishabeshtehi zil basar svara. I will say that brisa that we quoted before was obviously a messed up brisa. Right, that was a messed up, it was a mistaken brisa because the two cases, which are virtually identical, contradicted each other. So again, it's a corrupted brisa, it's a corrupted file, right? And therefore, Allah Chalamaisa, the Gemara says, throw it out. Throw it out, you can't learn anything from it. But we'll say, last case in the sugya. Listen to this case. Rav Papa Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua, Zobin Shumshimi Agida Dinara Malka. So Rav Papa and Rav Huna bought sesame seeds. They bought sesame seeds by the banks of the river Malka. Okay? Agur Malchi La'avrinu. So they hired boatsmen, sailors, to transport their sesame seeds upstream, downstream, wherever they were going. Kabilu alayu kol onsa d'nisyalid. And we'll say, what happened? What happened? So the boat guys, right, the sailors took upon themselves complete responsibility for any onsim. We'll say, what happened? The sof istaker nara malka. At the end, it turned out, we'll say that they stopped up the river. They blocked all boat traffic. So as I say now, obviously the boatsmen couldn't transport the sesame seeds. Amar lahu. So ultimately, again, Rav Papa and Rav Huna say to the boat guys, so Amar lahu, aguru chamri afkinu nehilan takabli salaychol ka'onsa demisyalid. So they say to the boat guys, okay, guys, you're now responsible to hire donkey drivers. Right? You took full responsibility for the transportation of the sesame seeds. Okay, it was fine. You were going to take it downriver. Now you can't take it downriver. You have to hire donkeys to transport it. So we'll say, so what happened? They brought the din. Also, they brought the case to Rava. We'll listen to this. Amar lahu kakoi chiyuri. So apparently, Rava got a little bit upset at Rav Papa and Rav Huna, and he called them white geese. You white geese. So I'll say that was an expression for an old person, right? You white geese, mishalchi glimi de inshi, you're trying to take the cloaks of people. Ultimately again, it's an unforeseen circumstance. So I will say, so what Rabba was saying to Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the blocking up of the river, ultimately again is something that is unforeseen, and a person cannot be held liable ultimately again for an unforeseen circumstance. So I will say a really incredible halacha that tells us that essentially, even in situations where a person takes on achrayus, person takes on complete responsibility, halacha l'maisa, that responsibility is capped for normative circumstances. Once something becomes totally out of the norm, then halacha l'maisa, a person is not achrayv. I'll just mention to you, there's an incredible tie-in to this Gemara to Tisha B'Av as well. We know the story. We did it not so long ago with Zechariah ben Avkalos. So let's remember again what happened to Zechariah ben Avkalos. Remember, Bar Kamsa goes ahead and riles up the Caesar against the Jews. So remember again, what was his plan? Bring a carbon, and you'll see the Jews won't go ahead and offer it up. So he splits the lip, a whole bunch of things. Remember, first they wanted to offer up the carbon. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalos said, you can't do that. People are going to say, you offer up Bali Mumin, blemished animals. Then they wanted to kill Bar Kamsa. Zechariah ben Avkalos said, you can't kill Bar Kamsa. People are going to say you get the death penalty for administering a blemish to an animal. So I will say, at every step, Zechariah ben Avkalos prevented them from taking decisive action, and ultimately, again, as a result of Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the Gemara says, because of the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalos, ultimately, again, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The Chassam Sofer is very bothered by this Gemara. He says, how could it be that we blame Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalos for the Churban? And the Chassam Sofer says something amazing. He says, Rabbi Shmuel Silber is not to blame. He says, in life, you can only plan for things for which you have a frame of reference. If you don't have a frame of reference for something, there's no if you depend. So from Rabbi Shmuel Silber's perspective, we'll say, what did Bar Kamsa represent? What did he represent? What did he represent? A Braigis Jew. We'll say, do you know how many Braigis Jews there are? Right? Kinai Nahara, there's a lot of Braigis Jews. And what do Braigis Jews do? What do they do? What do they do? Right? Generally, they go ahead and they get angry. And they talk, and maybe during the Haftarah they'll get the whole matzav going on about whatever it is that's ailing them, right? And the Maisa, they'll do it for a couple of weeks, and then what happens? They become normal again, right? Abnormal Braigis people over time become. That's what Rabbi Zechai ben Avkala's thought was happening over here. What happened with Bar Kamsa was an ones de lo shchicha. It was an ones de lo shchicha. Never before in the history of Klal Yisrael was there such a situation like this. People get angry, of course, people are falling out, but to go to these lengths, therefore the Chassam Sofer says it's unfair. It's unfair to blame the Zechai ben Avkalos for the Churban, because ultimately, again, it was an ones de lo shchicha. Rabbi says, as we close out this sugya, how do we pass in Rabbi? The Rambam writes, actually, this is Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch writes in Even HaEzer 7 Kuf Mem Hey Sif Vav, Harei ze giteich mehayom im masim michol izeh, v'naf alav bayis. Rabbi say this last case, which is the most interesting. Oh, they're all interesting. Reuven gives a get to Rachel. He says, this is your get from today if I die from this illness. And then what happened? V'nafal alav bayis. The house falls on him, or the snake bites him. Rabbi say, what's the halacha? Eino get. Eino get. It's not a get, right? It's not a get. Ultimately, again, because he said mechol izeh, and he didn't die mechol izeh. Instead, he died from some other only circumstance. Rabbi say, listen to the Shulchan Aruch says. Aval, this is fascinating. Im amar im lo ya'amod mechol izeh, v'nafal alav bayis o nashcho nachash o tarfo ari. Harezu Safek Migarashas. They'll say, this is great, this is great. So right, if Reuven gives Rachel a get, and he says, this is your get if I die from this illness, and then the house falls on him and the snake bites him, everyone agrees, it's not a get. Why? The condition wasn't fulfilled. He died from a different reason. What if he's bedbound and he says, if I don't get up from this illness, right, then this is a get, and then the house falls on him and the snake bites him, Shulchan Aruch Paskins, it's Safek Migarashas. Now, why is it Safek? Why is it Safek? Because at the end of the day, has the Tanai been fulfilled? Technically, he never got up. He didn't get up because he's got like a couple thousand pounds of concrete on top of him, right? But Lamaisa, again, he never got up. He never got up. So therefore, Shulchan Aruch Paskins is Safek Migarashas. But on the other hand, the reason he didn't get up is not because of his illness, but rather ultimately, again, because of the house or because of the snake. Good. Let's say Mishnah. Here we go. Bottom of Ayin Gimel. Let's say home stretch. Home stretch. Okay. Let's say Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Bottom Mishnah. Bottom Mishnah. So we'll say, so now here's fascinating. So we're continuing in the same cases, which are, remember, Reuven gave Rachel a get. And let's just keep this case easy. He says, this is your get me'achshav or me'ayom from today, if I die from this illness. Okay, so that's a good case. Everyone agrees that ultimately, again, it works. Now let's say, this Mishnah deals with the following situation. So what is her status? Like, what's her status now between the time that he gives her the get and let's say ultimately again when he dies, or just even forget about dying, what's her status after he gives her this get? So the Mishnah says, Lo tisyachid imo elu b'fnei edim. So I will say, listen to this. Because she has a get, right? Because remember, he's given her the get. So because technically speaking, she has a get in her possession. And I will say, when could the get be triggered? When could it be triggered? At any moment, if he dies. So she cannot be alone with him, except if there are witnesses present. So I will say, the idea over here is, we don't want them to be intimate. We don't want them to engage in bia, because technically speaking, the get can be triggered at any moment, and he's already given her a get. Look at Rashi, lo tisachid imo, zeh shenasan get, va'amar la mehayom imesi lo tisachid imo, shema yava ala, dikal mandamar chashin shema ba. Fine. So I'll say, so listen to this. So therefore, he can't be miyachid with her. Ela b'fnei edim, except with witnesses. Now we'll say, who could serve as these witnesses? Afilu api eved, or afilu api shivcha. So we'll say, by the way, for this type of eidos, it's anyone. You could use an eved, you could use a shivcha. One exception exception, chutz mishivchasa, except for her own maidservant, mipnei shalibo gasba b'shivchasa. Because it was a woman feels very familiar and very comfortable around her maidservant, and apparently it wouldn't even bother her to have relations in the presence of her maidservant. Mahi ba'osan hayamim. So what's her status during these days? When we say during these days, is he's given her this get, right? Reuben gave Rachel the get. This is your get if I die from this illness. So what's her mahi ba'osan hayamim? Rabbi Huda says, we'll say Amud Beis, on Gimel Amud Beis. Ke'eshes ish l'chol devareha. So Rabbi Huda says, she's like a married woman in all ways. She's like a full-fledged married woman. Rabbi Huda will say, now, obviously what that means is that halacha l'maisa, if she were to have relations with someone else, then halacha l'maisa, that's called adultery. That's called adultery. Rabbi Yossi omer migrash say migrash. So what Rabbi Yossi says, she's a safek. She's a safek. Now both saying, now why is she a safek? Why is she a safek? Because Rabbi say something very interesting is going to happen, which is when he dies, right? When Reuven dies, Rabbi say, what happens to her? What happens to her? Retroactively, she is migureshes ultimately again from the time that he gave her the get. At least that's the assumption we're working with right now. So as such, Rabbi Yossi says her entire status now, meaning from the time she gets the get until he dies, is safek ishes ish. Maybe she's married, maybe she's not a married woman. Says the Gemara, we'll say, here we go. So we'll say, so this is the same case, right? Reuven gave Rachel the get. And he says to her, this is your get. From today or from now, if I die. We'll say, now what happens? Let's say they saw her, she was alone with him in a dark room. Or we saw them under the bed together. We need not be concerned that they're engaged in any type of intimate behavior. Okay? What we assume is happening over here is immorality. Alright? And we're not worried that maybe they're affecting another kiddushin. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein Choshesh Mishum Kiddushin. We're not, I'm sorry, Av Choshesh Mishum Kiddushin. We have to even be worried about Kiddushin. Gemara says, whoa, my kamar, that was a whole jumble of information. What does this mean? Here we go. Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Barabu. Hachi kamar, what does it mean to say? Ra'ua Shenivala. Let's say we saw Reuven and Rachel. So we'll say, remember again, just the timeline here is very important. Reuven gave Rachel a get. Imasi, this is your get if I die from this illness. And then what happens? We'll say, after that, ultimately, again, the Gemara says, what we see that they had relations. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Choshesh mishum kiddushin. We'll say, the way we view that act of intimacy is maybe they committed, or maybe, we look at it as if they committed this bia as an act of new kiddushin, thereby voiding the get that he had given her. Okay, act of new kiddushin, thereby voiding the get. Nasan l'ksafim, if he gave her money. Choshesh mishum znus. So I will say, if there's just bia, then ultimately we're choshesh for kiddushin. If there's bia and he gives her money, then ultimately again, that's going to be znus. We're not choshesh for kiddushin. That's going to be znus. That's the act of immorality. The Aminan, Basnana Nasalna. Then Choshesh Mishum Kiddushin. And therefore, again, when there's an exchange of money, there's no need to worry about that Kiddushin happening over here. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af Bezu Choshesh Mishum Kiddushin. Even in this case, in other words, where money changed hands, we have to be concerned that maybe the husband had in mind, the wife had in mind for Kiddushin. What was the money? The money was a gift. Keman azla hadam. So I'll say, whose opinion is reflecting the following idea? There's machlokes when they saw them engage in intimacy. But if we just saw them alone together, but we didn't see any relations, then we assume that nothing happened, and therefore there is no need for a second get. I will say, whose opinion does that reflect? Keman kedivrei hakol. I will say that reflects everyone's opinion. Fine. Maskifla Abaye. Abaye says, 1 second. Midei ksafim katani. Did it say anything about money? Amar Abaye hachi kamar. That's what it means to say. Ra'uha shenivala. If ultimately, again, we saw that they had relations, choshesh mishum znus, then we have to assume, we'll say, our first assumption is not that they are making another kiddushin and thereby voiding the get. The bigger assumption, or the normal assumption is, it's nus. It's just an act of immorality. Vein choshesh mishum kiddushin. And we are not choshesh, and we're really trying to affect another act of kiddushin. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af choshesh mishum kiddushin. We're choshesh even for kiddushin. So Kiman Azla Had Amra Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say, in accordance with whose opinion is the following statement made? Machlokis kisharuah shenivala. What's the machlokis? We'll say the machlokis case is going to be when ultimately again we saw relations take place. Avalora or shenivala. But if we did not see relations take place, divrei hakol ein tzrichen hemena get. Everyone agrees that ultimately again they don't need a get. Kiman Rabbi say whose opinion is that like? Rabbi Yossi. That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Maskif la Rava, imkain, my af. What is the lashon of af even? Ela amar Rava haki kamar means to say, halach kamar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af lo ra'ua shenivala choshishin mishum kiddushin. He'll say they are alone with each other. They're alone with each other. Even if we did not see actual relations occur, ultimately again we assume that kiddushin occurred. Keman azla hada amra Rabbi Yochanan machlokis. So say in accordance with whose opinion is the following position stated? Machlokis kisharua shenivala. The machlokis is when they saw relations occur. Avalora shenivala. But if they didn't see relations occur, divrei hakol eina tzricha hemena get. Everyone agrees they don't need a get. Kiman delo kechad. I will say that opinion ultimately again is not reflected in any of the aforementioned positions. So I will say. So what do we do with this case? This is actually a really fascinating case. So remember again, what you have over here, I will say, is this continuation of the Mishnah. So now, Reuven gave Rachel a get. He said, this is your get, ultimately again, if I die from this illness. Right, if I die from this illness. So now we'll say, so up until now, we've been focusing on, first of all, what's the right formulation to make such a get effective? And ultimately, again, when is such a get effective? Now the Gemara is saying is, assuming the get itself is an effective get, what's her status after the get is given? Okay, so that's the machlokes, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. But now what we were just doing in this last sugya is, and what happens if they are alone with each other, or there's relations that occur after the get has been given, obviously before he died, right? After the get has been given. So we'll say, so what's her status? So we'll say, so the way that Rambam Paskins over here is that halacha l'maisa, in any of these cases, where halacha l'maisa, that if they were just alone with each other, but we did not see bia, we don't assume anything occurred. And if something did occur, then ultimately, again, we'll just simply assume that it is znus. That is znus. Rabbi said, but halacha l'maisa, if we saw that there was relations that occurred, even if there was an exchange of money, that Rambam Paskins that halacha l'maisa, we assume that what are they doing, Rabbi say? They are reforging their marriage. The Gemara is calling it a second act of Kiddushin. Now, I just want to be clear. Do they need a second act of Kiddushin? No. Why don't they need a second act of Kiddushin? Why? They're still married. The get hasn't taken effect. When we say second act of Kiddushin, I will say that effectively what they're doing is voiding the get. That's really what it means, avoiding the get. So I will say in a case where we see relations, even if there was an exchange of money, halach l'maisa, the way we look at that act of relations is as a reforging of Kiddushin, i.e. voiding of the get that was issued. I will say, I just want to end off with an incredible, incredible piece by the Tiferet. I will say, everything is hashgacha. Everything is hashgacha. And you're going to see the fact that we did, I don't want to say tomorrow's daf, because it's already today's daf. It's already Erev Shabbos. We did Erev Shabbos' daf right now in the aftermath of the fast. I will say, listen to this. Listen to this incredible idea. This last Mishnah said, right? Lo tisyached imo ela bifnei edim. Right? That's what the Mishnah said. After Reuven gave Rachel the get, ultimately again, they cannot have yichud. They cannot have yichud together, except if there are witnesses. Okay, that's the first part of the Mishnah. We'll say, what was the second part of the Mishnah? Mahi ba'osa hayamim. What is her status? And Rabbi Yehuda said, ke'eshes ish l'chol devareha. She's like an eshes ish. She's like an eshes ish in all matters. So also listen to this. The Tiferet Shlomo writes as follows. Shlomo Radomsk. He says, bless you. He says, Bizman HaGavos, after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So I will say, at the end of the day, when are we closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When are we closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When there's no Beis HaMikdash? So the Rebbe writes, Bizman Kriyas Shema Shachris V'Arvis. Makes sense. The time that we are closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the day is when we recite Shema Yisrael, Shema Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the acceptance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our Father, as our King, as our Sovereign, as the one and only power that controls everything in our life. That's when we're closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rebbe of Adam says, this is Mefurish in the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Lo tisyached imo ela bifnei edim. Ela bifnei edim. So listen to this. What does it mean? You can't, the only time to truly be alone, lo tisyachet imo, the only time you're really ever alone, only time you can really be alone with that Kadosh Baruch Hu, imo means Hashem, ela bifnei edim. Listen to this, says the Rebbe, the last letter of the first word of Shema is an ayin, and ultimately the last letter of the last word of Shema is a dalid, aid. The Mishnah is telling us, lo tisyachet imo ela bifnei edim. The time for yichud, the time for closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is only at the time of the witness, it's time of the aid. Shema Yisrael, Shema Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's the most incredible time of spiritual intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But then what does the Mishnah ask? The Mishnah says, but yet, here's what's incredible. When the Beis HaMikdash stood, the Beis HaMikdash stood, we were able to experience closeness at all times. So I have now these two paradigms. There's on one hand the times of the Mikdash, Beis HaMikdash, when spiritual closeness and connection to Baruch Hu is available at all times. And then I have, ultimately, again, Bizman HaGalus, when ultimately, Lo Tisyachid Imo Ela Bifnei Edim, then maybe the only time for real closeness is Shema. So it says there in Radomsk, what does the Mishnah ask next? Ma hi ba'osan hayamim. So the Gemara says, the Rebbe says, the Mishnah says, so what is our status during these days? What is our status during these days? Where are we in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I know what it was like when there was a Beis HaMikdash. I don't know what it was like, but I feel I know what it was like. Spiritual intimacy all the time. And I also know that sometimes, again, in Galus, there's only the ability, Lo Tisyachid Ima Ela Bifnei Edim. So, Mahi Ba'osan Hayamim. What is our status now? I say, isn't that the question we ask during Galus in general? What is our status? Where are we holding in our relationship with Hashem? To which the Rebbe of Radomsk says, the Mishnah answers, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ke'eshes ish lechol divarecha. We have a rock-solid relationship, a marriage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Despite the fact that there's no Beis HaMikdash, despite the fact that there is so much missing, despite the fact that there are so many ups and downs, despite the fact that we had today so much suffering, so much difficulty, never think chas v'shalom for a moment that means estrangement. Even though we don't have the mikdash, which affords us spiritual intimacy at all times, our status, mahi ba'osan hayomim, ke'eshes ish l'chol divareha. We are married to the Ribono Shel Olam in every single way. The relationship is airtight. The relationship is solid. The bond, simply unbreakable. Do we want the Beis HaMikdash more than anything? Absolutely unequivocally yes. Why? Because we want to be able to have those moments of connection at all times. But never think that the absence of the Mikdash means estrangement or ultimately distance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mahi ba'osan hayomim. What are we during these days of Galus? Ke'eshes ish l'chol devareha. Like a beloved wife who is always together with her husband, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at all times. I will say, is it not absolutely and overwhelmingly beautiful that on Motzei Tisha B'Av, Erev Shabbos Nachamu, the Ribono Shel Olam gives us this nechama in the daf. I will say, you know what this is? This is the Shabbos Nachamu present. You thought Shabbos Nachamu present was going to the Catskills. I don't even know if anyone goes to the Catskills anymore, whatever, right? That's not the Shabbos Nachamu present, I will say. This is the greatest Shabbos Nachamu present. I get it from Tisha B'Av, and I'm still wondering, Ma hi ba'osan hayamim. God, where are we standing? Where are we standing? What's our relationship? And the Ribono Shel Olam says, don't worry. Harei ki ishes ish l'chol devareha. We're good. We're solid. We're madly in love. We are forever connected. We hope the relationship gets even stronger with the third Beis HaMikdash. But we should know that even until that great day, we are like the beloved spouse to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for now and forever. What was I saying? Shkoyach. Shkoyach. Kiddush Levana. Chevra, anyway, Kiddush Levana? Let's finish it off. Kiddush Levana. All right, Chevra on Zoom. Those of you who are local, you could join us at Kiddush Levana if you'd like. All right, Chevra, Shkoyach, everyone. A good Erev Shabbos. Shalom Aleichem. Tell me your name.
Ephraim Shraga.
Ephraim Shraga. Shalom Aleichem. You want to say I'm just shutting this off?